Hey, this is John Fohl, and I'm a guitar player, songwriter, and singer, and all around musician from New Orleans, Louisiana. And this is the Talkin Blues podcast.
When does one become a New Orleans musician? Because I know you didn't originate that. So I wonder at what point when you moved there, you think, I'm now a New Orleans musician.
Well, I guess, I don't know. For me, probably being here through and after Katrina. And that was 2005. I'd been here 9 years at that point. And I don't know. It was, it's a funny thing because, is that something that we should do? Is move somewhere and call ourselves, But the thing for me, I guess, is I've always been a pretty New Orleans centric performer, and my music is, I've always, that's what brought me here was New Orleans music, and I've been lucky enough to play New Orleans music with as many of the founders and architects that were left as time has gone on. So I don't know. Yeah, funny. Maybe I shouldn't ever call myself a New Orleans musician.
Well,
but I do.
I think anybody who's played with Dr. John and was officially in his band would qualify as a New Orleans musician immediately.
All right. Well, there's that too. But that came along in 2002. So
yeah,
I'd been here 5 or 6 years at that point.
I want to get to more of that and why you moved here, but let's start at the beginning. Tell me how
Great.
Music came into your life.
Well, I grew up in a really small town in eastern Montana, really the West Dakota, if you want to call it that, way out in the middle of nowhere, really, and a really beautiful place in a lot of ways, but pretty desolate in a way. So, yeah, I guess music found me the way it did any kid, like through my older brothers and stuff. I was born in the mid '60s, so my older brothers, both had like high school bands that they put together to play. Louie Louie and Gloria and stuff that was easy to play and popular in the mid-late 60s. And so when I was really little, there was stuff around. There was drums in our basement and, some guitars around, and we had a piano in our living room. And so I was real just drawn to it. And, it's what my older brothers were kind of doing, so it seemed cool to me. And, of course, they didn't really stick with it and went on to just do other stuff. But for me, it was more of a this is what I'm doing,
What made you think that? What made you decide that this is what I'm going to do?
I'm not really sure, but it just seemed to be a determination for me. It's like my brother gave me a guitar, and showed me a few things. And so by the time I was 9, 10 years old, I was playing, I was able to play stuff. And by the time I was, so I'd been playing with some friends and stuff. There was other kids in school, and stuff. And then, by the time I was like, I guess 13, in between 6th grade and 7th grade, no, I guess between 7th grade and high school. That's what it was. 7th and 8th grade in high school. That's what it was. And I was 13, and there was guys in our little town that had been away to college and came back for the summer and put together a little band to play at the local bars and at some local parties. And they wanted a second guitar player, and somebody told them about me, and the guy came over and listened to me play and said, "Hey, you want to join our band?" And so, here I was playing with these 22-year-olds, and they showed me a lot, and I was like, sealed it further. I was like made a little money, and before I was even in high school, and so I was like, this is the way to go. It seemed like so. Of course, then they went back to college, and I went to high school and found the guys in high school who were players, and we started a little band. And
how much exposure did you have to live music other than your brother's band or local bands?
Oh man, very, very, very little. There was just so little live music where I grew up, and it was, there was so little of it that when a band or somebody did come to play in our town for a wedding or for the prom or for something like that, it was for me it was a big deal. I'd go hang out and try to meet them and get a lesson or something, or get some tips. I'd just go hang out, and they're unloading the trailer. Hey man, can you show me something on the guitar?
Do you remember the first big concert that you went to see and what impact that had on you?
Yeah, it was my brother and sister, who were quite a bit older than me, and I was I think 15 at this time, so I was probably a sophomore in high school. They took me to Billings, Montana, which was a 4-hour drive or something, to see Eric Clapton.
Nice.
And, and well, they took me to 2 concerts. There was that one, and then the other one was the Marshall Tucker Band with the New Riders of the Purple Sage.
Wow.
And you got to think this is probably it would have been probably 79, 1980 maybe. And so, it was great. The Clapton concert, I was really disappointed. He barely played.
Oh.
Yeah, and I was like, I was meh. But he had Albert Lee in the band, and they played in this like Metrodome kind of place. The sound was so terrible, and we had just terrible tickets or whatever. But it was just it was like watching little cartoons, and it sounded terrible. And as far as what Clapton was doing at that point in time, it wasn't very exciting, for me as a kid anyway.
What about the Marshall Tucker Band?
There wasn't much further, it was like maybe a month later, 6 weeks later or something, the same summer. Much more exciting to me in a way. Like it sounded better, and they seemed to be having a great time.
And what a guitar player!
Yeah, Toy Caldwell, right?
Yeah.
And truth to that one, my brother got me drinking, and so I was having a much better time. As far as concert vibes go, and excitement and all that kind of stuff.
So, but as a young kid, you said, I really want to do this. What do you think you imagined that would be, to be a musician?
Well, that's another thing. I got schooled pretty early that there were, other ways to being a musician than just being as to being a rock star or something. I was never after that. I was always more interested in rootsier musics. I wasn't ever interested in what was on the radio or top 40 or anything other than to listen to it and say, oh, that's what it is. But the music that really drew me and stuff was, roots music and blues music, and when I got turned on to New Orleans music, certainly, I felt like, whoa, I got to go there. And
give me an example who that would have been.
Oh, well, Professor Longhair, and Dr. John, my oldest brother, who's 17 years older than me or something, 16 years older than me. So he came back and lived in our town for a while when I was in high school, and he would bring over a few records every week, and then leave them for a week, and the next week he'd bring over a few more and take and so he listened to a lot of great stuff, and he turned me on to stuff. And so I remember the Gumbo record for sure, listening to it. But it kind of like it, when I was, I don't know, it didn't knock me out as much as like I was really into Little Feat and Lowell George and his solo record that he did, and he did all those Alan Toussaint songs.
Right.
And I started to put that together, like, oh, this is Alan Toussaint and and Irma Thomas and I started to get all this information, when I was probably in high school. And then a little later when I was in college and in a band that was traveling around the Rocky Mountains and stuff, I met a guy in Colorado one night. And, we were partying after our gig, and he was also a musician, and we were kind of, trading stuff on the guitars. He called himself Barbecue Bob. And really, really cool dude. And he told me about Snook Siglin. And I was like, who? I never heard of him. He said, write your address down. I'm going to send you some stuff. And so, a few weeks later when I got home, he had sent me a cassette tape of Snook Siglin. And the tape was a 90-minute tape. And the first 45 minutes was Snook's, in the radio station playing with Billy Dell, the DJ here in New Orleans at the time. And they were, he was playing his old records, and they were talking about him. And then you turn the tape over, and it's Snook's live in the studio playing an acoustic guitar, and just they've got beers, and he's in the studio just playing songs, and it's just magic to me. I remember hearing it, just going, "This guy is still alive!" Like, whoa. I got to go see him, and that was like the beginning of that kind of thing.
I don't know what the music scene is like in Montana, or I guess the Rocky music scene, but at one point you decided to move to Oregon. Is that Portland? Is that where you decided to go?
Well, yeah, I was I'd gone to college in Missoula, and then I dropped out of college and had, was just playing music.
What were you going to college for?
Mass communications, radio and film.
Okay.
And I was just kind of, I had moved to Missoula to get out of my little town and play music. And because there was a music scene there. There was, bands and clubs, parties and whatnot. So, yeah. So I lived there for 4 or 5 years, and then, I moved to Eugene, Oregon. And Portland first for a little bit, for a few weeks, but Portland seemed really terrible. I hated it. Really hated
really?
It. Yeah.
And then, is this when you joined Cherry Poppin Daddies, or is that way after?
Well, it was a little later. I'd moved to Oregon in '87 and was playing, just playing whatever gigs I could. I played country music, and I was playing in a kind of a Louisiana band called the Etouffee Band that had a fiddle player and played, Louisiana kind of music and at parties and weddings and stuff. And
I presume that was the direction you wanted to head.
Well, sort of. I mean, I was, I just was happy to be making a living. And even though I had little jobs in Oregon, I had a job at a music store and a little job at a community college for a little bit in their mass communication department. But mostly I was playing gigs and of any kind. I was playing in a couple blues bands, and I would do solo gigs and country gigs. And then I joined the Cherry Poppin Daddies when they had just started. They had a guy that was playing the guitar, but he couldn't really commit to doing it full time, and they really wanted to conquer the world. So they talked me into joining the band. It was really fun for a few years. Yeah, it was great, but it really wasn't for me. I was a little older than most of them, and it was just sort of like we were like a 9-piece band, so that was like we were getting 2 rooms and sleeping on floors, and it was kind of rough. So I left before their good times started.
But the good times started but the music that they had that got recognized, you were involved in, was it? Were you not?
Somewhat, yeah, because the thing, if you look at the record that they did, that got real popular, that sold, I don't know, I think it sold 3 million copies or something at this point. But the Zoot Suit Riot,
Which is like a compilation.
It's called the Greatest Hits of the Cherry Poppin Daddies, and it's taken stuff from their first 3 records, and then they recorded songs to fill it out. So it was because the thing was, the band wasn't really a swing band. We had a little swing element a couple of times. There was a couple of songs on our first record that were swingy, but most of the first record is like a rock record, or we were listening to bands like Psycho Funkapus and the Red Hot Chili Peppers and Faith No More. So it kind of had that kind of vibe to it. And then, but we had a horn section, so there was these swingy songs. And then the same thing on their second record. There's a few swing songs, and the rest of it was kind of, this kind of rock record. And so when they got their record deal finally, I mean, they held out for a long time for a good deal. We recorded for quite a while for, by different companies. We got courted, taken around and stuff. So when they finally did their deal, yeah, they made a compilation. They took stuff from the first 3 records,
and you were gone by then.
I had been gone for a good little bit by then. I had already moved to New Orleans.
You kind of said that you were always attracted to New Orleans music, but what made you decide to finally make that move, and what did you expect out of that move?
Yeah, it's funny. I hooked up with my wife in Oregon, and we just got really tired of the weather and stuff there. Oh, that's my dog barking.
What kind of dog is it?
Oh,
he sounds big.
He's medium sized. He's about 50 pounds. Well, 60 pounds. He's a little overweight. He should be 50 pounds. He's kind of an old New Orleans pound mutt. He's a good dog. But yeah, what did I expect? That's funny.
I don't know how easy it is for a musician, especially for a musician, to move to a new city city that you're not aware of, and especially a musical city. And how do you establish yourself?
Yeah, it's interesting because it just felt like falling into a big bathtub, man. I'm going to tell you, I visited here several times and had been on tour a couple times with different bands and had played here and stuff. So I was real, I had an inkling I wanted to move here. When my wife graduated from college, in Oregon, we just, we thought, well, we got to move somewhere. And we're like, because we were done with the Oregon weather. The Oregon winters were just wet and nasty and gray. And so we wanted to live somewhere south. We went to Austin for a minute and for, a few weeks and spent time there and thought about moving there. And we thought about Nashville. And we just kind of decided on New Orleans, and we both felt like, well, let's go try it out. And I'm going to tell you, I had met a few people here, so I knew I had a few numbers, but so I had a friend help us find a place to live, so we'd have a place to land when we got here. And so we had a place, and we're moving in with a truck, a little moving truck, and we backed it up and we're unloading it into this half of a double shotgun. And there's a guy working on the other side, he's doing some plumbing work. And he's watching us unload, and he sees me got a bunch of guitar cases. This is my cat here trying to get in on this. And he sees me with a bunch of guitar cases and stuff, and he strikes up a conversation. He says, "Hey, are you you just moving to town?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he says, "Well, are you good? Could you play a gig? Could you play like a gig playing blues and New Orleans music and stuff without rehearsing?" And I was like, "Sure." And he's like, "Well, are you busy tomorrow night?" And I'm not even kidding you. It was just like that.
Wow. So this guy says you want a gig, and so was he a musician?
Yeah, he was a bass player, and became my first guy in New Orleans. He got me on all his gigs. He was playing in a couple blues bands and with a trumpet player, and he, it's like, yeah.
Wow.
Friday, I moved. That was a Thursday, and Friday night I was working, and it didn't. My calendar didn't fill up. It wasn't like I was making a living or anything right away, but I was like, I met guys right away. A piano player that I had met, on visits. I got in contact with him because, he was really good. His name was Tom Worrell. And Tom got me on his gigs. Tom was playing at the time with this guy, Shebe Kimbrough, Edward Kimbrough, who was on the Professor Longhair records. Right. And and he was pretty elderly, he lived in the Gust housing projects, and we'd go pick him up and help him with his drum set and stuff. And but man, it was just you'd play these, if you played that music, if you played some Professor Longhair music, it was just, that pocket was undeniable. You go, oh man, it was so exciting to play with this cat. It just knocked me out. And I was like, here I just moved here, and I fell right in with this cat that was playing. I just felt like, wow. So, I don't know. I guess I started calling myself a New Orleans musician pretty quick.
and they welcomed you very easily, which is pretty neat.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what it's like to be a New Orleans musician, because I've heard various things. In some ways, I think I've heard people talk about having to cater to the tourists and do certain types of music. And obviously the competition of all the different bands. But how did you find that scene?
Well, there's certainly, I didn't ever find any competition. And when I think about bands having to compete and struggle, there's only really two places that's going to happen. That's Bourbon Street and Frenchman Street. And when I moved here, Frenchman Street didn't exist. There wasn't any music scene over there. There wasn't any clubs or anything other than Snug Harbor and the Dragon's Den, which was, but there wasn't anything. There wasn't any scene on the street or anything like that. So, yeah, I fell right in with blues bands. There was Bourbon Street work if you wanted it. But guys told me pretty quickly, it's like, yeah, that's work if you want it, but there's better work. You don't have to do that.
And when you say that, do that, what is that? That's cover tunes.
Well,
and
cover bands and long days. Those bands will play 7 sets sometimes and stuff like that. So, Frenchman Street's not quite like that. Bourbon Street's a little more entrenched in its old kind of feeling and stuff, but there's some great bands. There's great musicians that just it's one way to make a living in the city for sure. And there's it's like there's world-class musicians in some of those bands. You'll go and you'll see, oh, that's the bass player for the Subdudes. And you go, oh, that's it's like. And so then Frenchman Street is a little different. It caters more towards the traditional New Orleans scene, and there's some original music over there, some singer-songwriter scene a little bit. And as far as making a living at it over there, on Frenchman Street, most of the clubs don't pay much, and so you're really stuck having to hustle the tip jar. And that's when you say having to cater to the tourists. That's when that happens. Right. When it's just when it has to become a tip jar hustle. If your band starts, 3 months later and you're doing a tip jar hustle every day, and the music gets dumber for sure. So
I wonder. So when you move there, and I guess the number one priority is just start gigging and getting work. Mm-hmm. But did you have a goal in mind as to what kind of musician you wanted to be and what you wanted to do with your career?
Well, Mako, I've always been really lucky, feeling that I get to do a lot of different things. Like for me, New Orleans was ended up being really perfect, and it fit right away because I was able to do all kind of different things. I was able to play solo gigs.
Speaking of which, do you not have a solo gig that you do every Monday that
I
you
do.
have been doing since 1996? Is that correct?
Since 1997. That's right. Yeah.
Okay, 97.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
I know. It's funny. Sometimes there's nobody there. Sometimes there's a big crowd. It's funny. Yeah. Like the Jazz Fest time, it's there was the bartender was like, "Wow, I've never seen it so crowded," and then then last week it's like the same bartender's like, "Wow, where was that crowd at?"
But to have a gig that long,
it's
mind-boggling.
It's kind of great in a way. I spend a lot of time on the road where I'm not doing the gig, and I'll have
right.
When I used to travel with Dr. John, I was sometimes only there, 20 weeks out of the year. Now it's more like 40 or 45 or something. But it's an amazing thing to have a place that people can find you. It's I get people from all over the world find me there. It's great.
I can imagine. And you're doing your solo gig. Is that who you are? I know you play all sorts of different kinds of music and all different genres, and you've played with tons of different people. But if I said, who are you? Like, what kind of music do you play? Is that the essence of who you are?
I don't know. It's definitely a big part of it. That's when I'm playing my own songs. Generally, I'm playing a solo gig, and I'm playing guitar stuff that I've been living with a long time and stuff like that. So I guess in a sense that it is for sure. I'm sure people would say that. But as far as I do equally as many gigs on the electric guitar and playing with bands, and I find a real it's just one of my biggest joys is playing with a singer-songwriter who's got great songs and making those things sound good and come alive. That's just one of my favorite things, is working on other people's music and making it good.
Well, you work with Johnny Sansone and Anders Osborne, two great songwriters.
Yeah, indeed.
How did the Dr. John thing happen? So you were there for 6-7 years. How does
I was playing around. I did a session with Herman Ernest, the drummer that was in Dr. John's band at the time, and I did a record with him and George Porter and with this guy Joe Crown, he was a organ player, and so it was a Joe Crown organ combo, and so that was when I met George that day, and I had known Herman a little bit. We'd been on a few blues gigs, but they were just kind of weird throwaway gigs, and so this session was when I got to really know him. And that session was really instrumental in a lot of ways because, a few weeks after that, George asked me to sub for the guy in his band, and so I did a bunch of gigs with Porter's band, and a few weeks after that, Herman called me and said, "Hey, man, the chair in Dr. John's band is opening up, and I'm thinking about you." And so, yeah, it was a great session.
How difficult was it to get into doing session work when you moved to New Orleans?
Well, I mean, as far as it's a funny thing. It's just kind of luck of the draw in a way. It took quite a while, but there was one guy I met who did a lot of stuff for movies and radio advertisements and television advertising and that kind of stuff, local kind of stuff. So I met him, and he hired me for a session. And it was, it was like a Whitney Bank thing, but it was like a big band, it was like a horn section, a string section, and a rhythm section, and it was like a big session. And for a bank commercial, I was like Wow. But it was great, and so he got me a lot of work over the years in movies and stuff, and I ended up becoming real good friends with him and stuff. But he's since moved to Nashville the last few years, so I don't. His session work's gone.
Do you read?
Not very well. I read. I read, chord charts and stuff like that. But as far as sight reading, music and stuff, not very well. It takes me a long time. So,
But you can fit into a session like that with a big band and not have any problems.
yeah, I can read enough to fake my way through, and it never really gets, asked. I remember one movie thing that I got hired for that was real heavy as far as reading a score. And I was real nervous about it and had gotten the score ahead of time so that I could study it. But when I got to the session, the director guy was just like, "Hey, so don't pay attention to the score. Just play this like a guitar player would."
Like a guitar player would.
It's like this is what the computer thinks a guitar player should play. Don't look at that. Play what a guitar player would play here. And so the whole, a lot of time you're just playing along with the band and doing what you would do on a gig. And so,
And was it more commercial stuff and soundtracks versus different artists?
Yeah, there's some album work. I made a lot of records here over the years, with different people, and people come to New Orleans to make records and stuff like that. But yeah, there's a fair amount of just all of it kind of pieces together. There's a lot more music for film and television here in the last decade. I would say in the last 10, 12, 15 years. There's a lot of it now that didn't exist before. So there's a lot more production for that kind of stuff here. But a lot of it's smaller studios and stuff too. So as far as big studio sessions going, it's not very often anymore. But
so Herman says you should try out for this gig with Dr. John. What are you thinking? What happens next?
Oh man, it wasn't even really well, I guess it was kind of a tryout thing, but it was he just kind of slid me in there, man. He said, "Look, make me some stuff, make me a tape that I can play for Mac of some stuff you've done, And so I did that and, handed it to Herman, and he played it for Mac. And then, he called me a week later or something, said, "Great, here's the calendar. Can you start on this date?" And I was like, "Nope." I was like, I had a solo tour that I was in Europe, and I really couldn't cancel it. You know what I mean? It was a whole tour of solo gigs, and I was like, well, I said I could start, 10 days after that, but I explained to him why. I said I can't, I got this tour booked, and it was fine. The other guy who had been there, Bernard Pochet, played, just a few extra weeks. So it was no big deal. But yeah, they let me slide right in there.
So there was no audition process. It was based on the fact that you played with Herman a few times, and
yeah, there was no rehearsal. There was no audition, no rehearsal, no nothing. There was, they sent me some recent live shows. So they had their sound guy record some live shows, and he sent me, 3 or 4 of them. And as soon as I got off the phone the first time with Herman and he asked if I could do the gig, I was started learning the catalog,
And it's quite an extensive catalog.
Oh yeah, and that's funny too. But yeah, so they gave me some stuff to learn, and we flew out. The first gig was at a club called the Conduit in what's that town? Oh, one of those New Jersey towns. One of the real ugly ones. I can't remember it. But anyway.
It's probably a good thing you don't remember it.
Yeah. Anyway, the first gig was at it was like a rock club, and it was, I guess it was like a little audition. They had it was a 4 gig run, like a Wednesday through Saturday little run through these little clubs and theaters up on the East Coast. And the first gig was, we had a little sound check that maybe lasted 45 minutes. We ran over a few endings, and a few just to make sure I had listened to the stuff and was going to be fine. And before the gig, Mac called me in my hotel room and he said, "I got a good feeling about this."
And did you have a good feeling about it?
Oh, I was psyched. Yeah, I was super psyched. I was like, I got a real job, like I'm going to, I might be able to buy a car. That's what it felt like. I just felt like, man, I've got a real job now. Like, I'm going to show up dressed nice and sober.
So you were confident. Like you were, at this point, you're a confident player. You know that you belong here.
Oh yeah, yeah. After the first couple gigs, it was like everybody, all their crew and everybody said, "Yeah, hey, just great, perfect. It's gonna be fine. Don't worry." And they sent me the schedule and said, "Make sure your passport's good and you've got a big suitcase."
And so that would have been like the Creole Moon tour? Is that around that time?
Yeah, exactly. They were touring behind Creole Moon. And right after I joined the band, right like the same time I joined the band, he was putting together the deal to make Nolan's This, That, or the Other. And
which is a superb record.
Yeah, and it was he got back together with I'm so bad with names anymore. The producer. It was the same guy that did Going Back to New Orleans.
Oh, okay.
And there was a big budget record. They had a budget, and they got. I mean, it's so good. Everybody's on there. Smokey Johnson and
Mavis Staples, Willie Nelson, B.B. King.
Yeah.
I mean, were you involved in all of that?
I got to go do a session. Yeah, he. Like I said, that was literally, in maybe 6 or 8 weeks after I joined the band, they were making that record. And so I wasn't scheduled to be on the record, but Mac got me on there. And, that's just because Mac was so cool like that. He just wanted to, he said, get this guy, have him come and play. And so, they had me come and do an overdub session. I spent maybe 4 or 5 hours there. Played on, 5 or 6 songs, I think.
So how long does it take you to think, I'm part of this band?
That was probably it. When he had me in the studio. And he didn't have to, you know what I mean? Like it was already kind of a done deal. And so that's when I thought, oh, he likes me, man. He wants me here.
And when you join a band with a legend like him, does anybody tell you what you shouldn't do?
Are you talking musically?
Yeah, musically.
Nobody said anything.
And so you're just taking your cues every night on stage based on what Mac tells you. If you're taking a guitar solo, he'll just point to you. Because, I presume that even though you rehearse, these songs are never played the same twice, right?
Well, pretty much, yeah. I mean, like I said, they gave me some shows to learn. And so, I learned those 3 shows pretty well, and so after the first night, we played that club, the Conduit Club in, I'll remember the town, New Jersey at some point. But we were driving the next day to the next town, the next gig, and Mac, had a sheet that the tour manager had made for him on his computer of his whole book of all the records, all the songs, in an order. It was like a page. There was 300 some songs or something. So he handed that to me. He said, we don't do very many of these, but mark the ones And so when I'm making the list, you know, I can pull stuff out. And and you know, I marked a lot of songs. You know, I marked a lot of songs because, you know, a lot of it was classic song, a lot of it was, you know, American songbook songs, a lot of it, you know, stuff, you know, and a lot of it was classic New Orleans stuff, a lot of, you know, and then all his records, of course, and stuff. But so, you know, I like to think that I had a little hand in making his book grow, because they had you know, in the years before me, the book had shrank as far as like older stuff. You know, they would make a record and add songs from that, and, you know, play Iko, and, you know, the same things every night, and then add some of the new songs. And so that's what they were doing. And so the book was pretty, you know, by the time I had been there a few years, the book was like 300 songs. And we did tours where we went through the book.
Wow.
You know, we did a tour once in England with a band. We had an opening band on these like 15 dates, which was kind of rare. It usually there'd be different bands, but Max Record Company or something had some hookup with these guys, and they were in a little van opening for us every night for like 15 dates. And on the second day, one of the guys commented to Mac that, "Wow, you guys played a way different set than you played last night." and Mac, like, I was just saw him. He took that as a challenge, and so every day on that tour, we did a different show, different opener, different closer, different, you know, the whole show completely different.
Okay, so what does that do?
Just to blow those kids' minds, because they were like 20 years old, and Mac wanted to like school them. It's like, all right, this is what we can do. This is what the pros can do.
So what does that do to you as a musician playing on stage with them? It just keeps you on your toes, and does it make you play better?
Yeah, you'd get the set list in the afternoon, you know, and then you'd go, oh, what's that song? You know, you'd have to go to the book or go to YouTube and go find it, you know, like, oh, what's that song? You know, and how's it, you know, we'd have to talk about the endings. The band would, you know, get together before the gig and say, okay, how's this ending go, and stuff like that. So,
and literally there is a book on his piano with all the lyrics, because he was concerned about not remembering lyrics.
Yeah, they did that every day. They'd line up his lyrics for him in the book. And there was a lot of gigs we'd do, where we'd go through that. We'd play these jazz clubs sometimes. There was one in Seattle that we'd play, every year, every other year or something. And we'd play 2 shows a night for a week, and we'd go through the book. He'd dig out, chestnuts. It's great. It's just awesome. That was my favorite part of the whole thing. Was like, oh man, look at this song. And it made us feel really great as a band. We'd always, we'd say, wow, well, this band could fucking play anything. Because we'd play, rock and roll and jazz and blues and all of it right on.
What did you learn from that experience?
I learned a lot about music. I learned really a lot about, I think, when I look at it in retrospect, because it's been like 10 years now or whatever, but I really, I knew a good bit of music before that, but coming out of that, I feel like I learned a lot about music hanging out with that guy for 12 years, soaking that up. As I feel like there's a whole side of stuff that I never, there was no way I would have known that any other way other than coming through that. There's just certain ways that I put things together now musically. It's certain turnarounds and stuff that I just go, oh yeah, I stole that from Mac or whatever, or from that band, or yeah.
Can you give me a sense of who Mac was to you? I'll just share the fact that I got to work with him a little bit, and when I first met him, he scared the hell out of me, but he turned out to be one of the most generous persons I've met. And when I think about the highlights of all the people I've worked with or got to interview, he certainly is in the top three. And I feel like I was so fortunate to meet him and just how generous he was. I think I've told the story a few times, but he was the first musician after the interview to ask me about my family.
Yeah,
and
right.
He was not like, it just surprised me, but because, and not that anybody should ask me, but he was very, he really wanted to know. He wanted to know about my dad. He wanted to know about my mom and how they were doing, and it was surprising to me.
Yeah.
Because of who he was and whatever, but he took interest, and I got to see him a few times afterwards, and I just thought he was such an amazing human being. Who was Mac to you?
Well, I feel really fortunate to have gotten to know, the Mac who, when I got to know him, he was, 13 years clean, I guess. And so he was, reflective on his previous life. And, like I guess there must have been a real scary Mac. But I'm glad I never really knew him.
Did you ever read his biography?
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah. It's a good read.
And he had plenty. He had a lot of stories, and there was a lot. Mac. People forget that he was a, he did a lot of bad stuff to a lot of bad people. So, there was complications in human beings, like always. But like I said, I got to know him at a time when he was just a really warm and generous guy. He, I feel like I was there at a pretty good period musically for him. I made 5 or 6 records. He wrote. He was still writing. He wrote. He was still angry, about stuff, about the world, and yeah. So I'm glad I got to know that Mac. He was a good guy, man. He was musically, man. He looked out for us on so many levels, man. He would, here's a generosity guy. Like there were tours. There were some lean times for sure, like 2007, 2008, the crash and everything. I mean, that touring was just really horrendous back then. It was just, he, to keep the band together, man, he was taking gigs and doing stuff where I guarantee you we were making more money than he was. And he would do that, he would go just to keep everybody together, keep everybody working, man, keep his crew. He was always worried about making sure the crew was taken care of, and not just the band and stuff, but if he ever got a session when we were on the road, if we were going to England and he got, somebody called him to do a session, he would always get the band. He said, "You got to have my band. I'll do it, but you got to have my band. You got to pay them too."
One of those sessions was a session with Klaus Voormann.
Yeah.
The sideman becomes a frontman, or whatever it was called. Tell me what was that like?
They're called Klaus. That was a great little hookup. Klaus is so cool, man. He was such a great dude. He really wanted Mac to play on that. A Sideman's Journey project that he was doing, because he was going around to all the guys that he'd played with in his life and had a lot of and his friends and stuff, and he and Mac had been friends in the 70s and had done a lot of session work with Harry Nilsson and stuff like that. So he really wanted Mac to play on this record, and so he came around to this gig we were doing in Hamburg. and he came to the gig, and I was actually opening the gig solo that night. And so I played my little set, and then I came back, and there's Klaus in the dressing room, and that's where I met him. And he really he was like, oh, that was great. I really loved your show. And then he told me who he was. He's like, I'm Klaus Voormann. And I was just like, ooh, man, wow. And so anyway, we did our set with Mac. And then afterwards, Klaus had the studio booked for the middle of the night in Hamburg because, he was really hoping Mac would go and do this session. And Mac was not really feeling it. He was, had tired. And now we'd done the show and we had to travel again the next day. And so, Klaus was kind of waiting around the hotel after the gig, and our tour manager's kind of trying to make it happen because he's like, this is Klaus. He's really been trying to make this happen. So anyway, he goes and talks to Mac, and Mac says, okay, I'll do it. And Mac called me up and said, hey man, would you mind coming along and just, hanging out? So, just so I have somebody there. And so I went along with him, and I was just kind of, going to be a fly on the wall. But Klaus said, oh, why don't you play? There's some guitars there in the studio. So I ended up playing on the session there. And, we did just one song. We played Such a Night, the slowest version ever. And then they did a little interview for the movie that came out about that. And then, I don't know, a few weeks later, maybe a month later or something, Klaus called me and said, hey, I'm finishing the record in Memphis next month, and I'm hoping you can come up and play on the last session. And so I, it worked out with my schedule. So I took the train up to Memphis and did a session up there with, it was great, with Bonnie Bramlett and David Hood from the Muscle Shoals guys. And
wow.
It was a magic session. I thought for me, it was just awesome. And then Klaus, at the end of it, he's like, John, I have this song that I think I'm not really happy with the guy who sang it. I think you could sing it better. Would you mind singing it? And so he had me make a pass at this song, and I ended up singing on that record. So it's really fun, really great.
Wow. You talked about Dr. John's, that he still had the anger, and one of the, if I'm not mistaken, one of the albums that he did which still had anger was what happened after Katrina. Tell me about the whole Katrina experience for you living in New Orleans.
Yeah. Wow, it's pretty crazy. I was pretty lucky. My house was mostly okay, and my job was still intact. I was still, we still had gigs on the road. Yeah, I did, better than everybody else in the band. Our drummer and bass player both lost their houses. Mac didn't live here at the time, so
right.
But yeah, my house, my little area was. I mean, I had damage and whatnot, but I didn't get flooded out. I didn't lose everything I own or anything.
And were you there?
We were off the road when it happened, but my wife and I and our dogs and cat and everything, we went to Auburn, Alabama first, to a friend's house, and we rode the storm out there, and then we just figured we'd be going home afterwards, and then when we realized we couldn't, we got somebody that gave us a place to live in Galveston, Texas for a while. So we boogied over to Galveston and hung out there for a couple of months. Or my wife hung out there. I was playing on the road and traveling still. We played in Japan and all over the place during that time. But yeah, when we finally got to come home, it was about maybe 2 months. 2 months later, end of October. And it was a mess.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It was something to come home to. There, the city was. Wow, it took. Yeah, it's even hard to remember sometimes because there's already been a couple other hurricanes since then.
But a lot of musicians moved out of New Orleans at that point.
They did. There's a lot that relocated. There's people were so generous. New nobody did better during Hurricane Katrina than the musicians and the artists and stuff in New Orleans. We got all the help. We got all the, our fans took care of us. They gave us places to live. They brought us, fans took people in and, in towns all over America. They gave them places to live and gigs. And, that just didn't happen for most people.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very kind of weird thing. I always felt, like, I don't know, it's a real weird thing when hurricanes. I always feel pretty responsible to stay. I'm an able-bodied human. I feel like I should stay because the only people that get help after a storm or get help from people that stay. Yeah. So it's a weird thing. Yeah.
What does that experience? How does that experience change you as a person?
Well, I think, I guess care a lot less about your stuff. I mean, I still had all my stuff, but I didn't care about any of it anymore. You know what I mean? Like nobody had anything. I gave away a lot of guitars afterwards, and it's a tough question, Michael.
Yeah. I remember talking to Alan Toussaint, and he said that in some ways that, and saying the same thing as you did, that the musicians benefited because people were so welcoming, and in some ways his profile, I think he said that it went up because of it.
Yeah, and his collaboration with the English guy, Elvis Costello.
Yeah,
was a big deal for a few years afterwards.
Yeah.
And I mean, the musicians on the big level, of course, was just kind of whatever. But a lot of musicians on a small level, even, just they did better than their neighbors and stuff. And they all tell you the same thing. It's like, and most of them did what they could with their donations and stuff. I know musicians that raised money for, just for their neighbors to get new heaters and new air conditioners and stuff like that. So, it was a mess, man.
Now, many, many years later, how different is the city? I actually haven't gone back since Katrina, so I have no idea, but it's a city I want to go back to. How different is New Orleans to you as a musician, as somebody who lives there?
And and then it's even different again. But I think after Katrina, there's this sort of there was a lot of sympathy for New Orleans, the Treme show and all that, and stuff. But as far as like, and so there was a lot of people moved here. A lot of people that like came to gut houses. A lot of church groups came here by the busloads to gut houses and stuff, and a surprising number of those people came and stayed and came and became teachers. And so like there's a lot more young people. There's a lot more young people, vibrant. I think the city's more vibrant in that way, but there's a lot of things that are getting lost, the neighborhoods and culture. And, it's the same everywhere. We lament that kind of thing, but it just happens. It's just part of the deal. It happens. The city's been here a long time. It's changed a lot of times over the years. It'll change some more in the future. So that's part of the deal. But
and musically, with all those musicians moving out, I don't know if they've come back, but is the city different?
Musically, I think. Well, the city's different. I don't know if it's what we kind of give that. What's the reason for that? If it's just Katrina or other stuff, but the one thing I'm seeing is that there are, when I moved here, I walked among giants. Fats Domino was still alive, and Earl King was still alive. You could go hang with Earl King at the Tasty Freeze on Louisiana Avenue. He was there every day. Alan Toussaint, you'd see him in the hardware store. You know what I mean? And the Snook Siglin played every Friday night.
So you got to see him when you moved down there.
Oh, yeah, I got to play with him.
Oh,
I got
wow. Okay.
Yeah, man. Yes. So I always the thing now is like, I mean, there are very few of these on this level of that age left. There, Irma Thomas is still here, but like there are very few. Older musicians are just it's becoming a real problem, and I don't. There's some people out there taking their place, but that's going to be lost.
Yeah.
There's going to be a big gap in who's filling their shoes. We got Trombone Shorty, Troy Andrews, and there's a few bands like that, John Grow. But who's taking the shoes of these giants that really made worldwide impact on the music scenes forever, historical impact. And so yeah, that's one thing I noticed that's a lot different. I think the pandemic changed some things. I noticed, I mean, and this is just part of getting older too, but there's a lot of young musicians in New Orleans I don't know. It's like I can't keep up. I can't keep up with them. I can't know them all. I can't go see them all. And so like I'm constantly meeting people that have just moved here.
Right.
So I think there was a lot of, pandemic reshifting, and people use their unemployment, maybe musician unemployment, to move here and, or something. I don't know, but there's a lot of people out that there's a lot of new people in town, which could be a great thing. We'll have to wait and see.
I guess it can be encouraging when you think that the people are still interested in seeking out music in New Orleans and making music.
Yeah.
Is it different for you to be making music in terms of, I know things are still different because of the pandemic for everybody, but does it feel like it's come back, and is your gig schedule as busy as it was a number of years ago?
Well, it's interesting, and because I feel like, yeah, I mean, at this point in time, like this month, last month, the next few months, it feels like it's probably back to about what it would have been in 2019 or something.
Right.
I have 3 or 4 trips this summer to go play places, and I didn't travel at all last summer to go play, or the last 3 summers really. So, but that's kind of on me too. I mean, I've had opportunities to go travel, and I just didn't.
Has it changed your opinion about traveling? That whole experience?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I've gotten out of the habit of traveling. I've stopped traveling for a living. When I left Dr. John's band, I mean.
Right.
There's always some traveling here and there, but as far as like just living on the road, yeah, there's no part of me wants to do that again. But yeah, so yeah, traveling to me, it's like, if I could play enough gigs right here in town and never travel, that would be great, but that's never going to happen. So
yeah, well, I know, but I can imagine that it seems glamorous, and I guess at times it might be, but I'm sure being on tour could get tiresome very quickly.
Yeah. And well, I mean, for some people it is glamorous, for most of us it's not. For me it's not. The level that I'm at right now or whatever, it's just, it's just going to work, and it's harder to go to work when there's an airport involved.
Yeah. So I know you're I think doing some gigs with Lynn Drury. I know you still work with Johnny Sansone, a number of different people. I noticed that you haven't really done a solo album in a long time.
Yeah, my last one was 2018 or whatever, I guess. I've got songs, and I've got I got a new guitar that I'm gonna make so I'm gonna make a record. I'm gonna make a solo record, a real like acoustic-y, solo-y record. You know, maybe some duets and stuff. But yeah, I've been trying to figure that out recently.
What's the significance of the new guitar?
Oh, I had some. I hate to use the word fans because it's just a weird word, but I had these people in Michigan that they had a guitar that it was in their family. The guy's brother had, and it's a beautiful old Martin guitar from the 50s, and they thought I should have it. You know, they brought it down and they thought, you know, you should be playing this and make music with this. So it's amazing. It's
Wow.
the holy grail of acoustic guitars. It's like if you had all the money in the world and went to buy one, this is what you'd go buy. And
Did you know the moment you put your hands on it?
pretty much, man. I will say, you know, we took it out the case. I mean, we talked about it ahead of time, and they knew what it was and had done their research and whatnots. But yeah, when we took it out the case and I played it, I was like, yep, this is why. This is why they go into collections. Yeah, it's a beautiful instrument, and so yeah, I feel obligated to get some recording done with it.
But going into collection is not necessarily a good thing for a guitar, right? Guitars are made to be played, so when it's not played, it doesn't really serve the function correctly. Am I correct in assuming that?
Yeah, everything is like that. I mean, but you know, there's just not enough people to play all the guitars that are made. I mean, I'm telling you, they make millions of guitars every day. Every day there's millions of guitars being made in factories all over the place, and people are buying them and they're having them, and so there's way more guitars than can be played. So that just happens. But yes, when it comes to an old instrument, it's a real shame to me if they don't get used. You know, I mean, I have. It's it's silly how many guitars I have because it's you're a guitar player. People give them to you. You have them. Companies give them to you. You know, you get a guitar a year or something, and all of a sudden you got 50 guitars, and you can't play them all. You know, you try to play the ones that matter.
But okay, so how do you decide on what to play? Do you know each guitar and its sound? I mean, and you say, okay, I want to play this song. Oh yeah, I got to get the Les Paul out, or how does that work?
Well, I mean, if you're going to the studio, I'll take a handful, or a small handful, depending on most sessions I'm going to, I know what I'm going to do, and I'll take that. I'll take what I need to do that. But every now and then you're going and you can be creative and say, people say bring some stuff. But yeah, when I'm home and I'm doing a session for somebody, it's like, yeah, I have a real luxury because I have them. They're all here, and I have different amps and whatnot, so I can listen to a song and go, oh, this needs that, I think. And yeah, it's a real luxury.
Was there ever a time where you questioned being a musician or doing what you do?
Oh, for sure, yeah. Real recently, the pandemic had that. We're wondering.
I guess. I mean, because you weren't doing any gigs.
Yeah, I mean, for me, everything I was doing just stopped, fell apart. Yeah. So at first it seemed like, oh, it's going to be a few months, and then it seems like, oh, it's going to be a year. Like, oh, well, what are we going to do? Because, you know what I mean? Like, so then, yeah, I'm questioning, how is this going to look when we come? How do we come out of this? What do we do when we come back? Are we going to be able to come back? Are we going? Are people going to? Yeah. So it's all been working out. And New Orleans again, stepped up and took care of their musicians. The people here had porch concerts, and they turned. There's a handful of people that turned their large backyards into legitimate outdoor music venues where they did permitting and the temperature checks and you know, all of that kind of stuff. So, yeah, New Orleans stepped up again in a big way. There's a bunch of places that opened up as outdoor venues.
I was wondering more like when you're starting out and not being able to get gigs and not being able to afford guitars, and then all of a sudden you find yourself looking up and seeing 50 guitars in your studio.
Well, that's funny, but you know, I will say this: I never really thought about doing anything really different. You know, it always worked out. You know, the biggest decision, I think, when you're young and you're going to try to be a musician or an artist or something, like do something that you love instead of, you know, some lucrative thing. You just have to figure out how to live without making a lot of money, and then, you know, B, how to be happy living without a lot of money, and then C, how to attract a partner who will get in that game with you. So yeah, I've been extremely lucky in all three of those because I figured out early that I wanted to be a musician, so that meant I wasn't going to care about money. And, you know, I've been lucky enough to just kind of have enough, you know. It's worked out.
And you've seen the world.
I've seen the world. You know, I'm really lucky. Yeah, man. I've got a house and I've got a girl and I've got 50 guitars and
cats and dogs.
Yeah, I got cats and dogs, and I've got a lot of beautiful plants out here in New Orleans, and it's
and even just the story you told about the guitar, the fact that somebody would give you that guitar, that guitar that you're inspired by to write more songs. I mean, I don't know how you put a price on something like that.
You can't. It's a trip, man. It's real recent. It's just in the last couple months, so I'm still grappling with all that. Like, you know, it's generosity on a huge scale.
Yeah,
it's crazy. So,
well, I look forward to whatever that music that's going to come out of this, and I've been listening to some of your solo stuff and been really enjoying it. And I really appreciate you taking this time, especially at such short notice. But I've known you, I've seen you play for a number of years, and I'm thrilled that I get a chance to get to know you a little bit.
Excellent. Well, we'll be up in we're going to be in Buffalo. That's close to you, isn't it?
Yeah. Because Lynn told me about it.
We'll be up in Buffalo with Lynn in June, doing a little tour with Lynn up there, Buffalo and Rochester, and the Sanson's up by that way too. We're going up to Maine and New Jersey and stuff this summer too. So
okay, well,
but nothing in Toronto yet.
Yeah, Toronto's a tough nut to crack.
Yeah,
so
beautiful though. I love it there.
When you said that you were in New Orleans the last 3 summers, I know that people in Austin talk about living there and trying to get out and tour during the summer because it's so hot.
Yeah,
I presume it must be pretty nasty in the summer there, and that
it is, but it's kind of nice too. You know, things go slower. You do what you got to do early in the day, or you know, in the evening, and there's kind of a nice thing about the summer here. It is hot. It is hot, but
I remember being there in May, and I was stunned at how humid and hot it was.
Yeah, I've been building a fence the last few days, and so I stop work about 1:00 usually.
Well, John, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
It's been a thrill. I really appreciate this.
Awesome. Appreciate you.